In this video we're going to install two Storefront servers. We're going to then add both Storefront servers to a Storefront server group for high availability. We'll install an SSL certificate on our Storefront servers to secure the traffic between the user's endpoints and the Storefront servers. We'll then load balance the Storefront base URL on the Netscaler for high availability. We'll set up a dedicated Storefront load balancing monitor. We'll set up the load balancing method and persistence settings. We'll also then create a Storefront store. We'll add our delivery controllers to our Storefront store. The delivery controllers we'll add will be the load balance XML VIP that we created in the previous video. Because we've got certificates on our delivery controllers, we'll secure the XML traffic with SSL. We'll set up the authentication methods on the store, so things like trusted domains, pass through from Netscaler. We'll then basically add our Netscaler gateway appliance to Storefront, enable remote access on the store, and then we can test connectivity through both Storefront internally and through the Netscaler externally from the internet. So let's begin. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the media, the ISO file for 1912. The Storefront version we'll be using is the 1912 LTSR version, which is on the installation media. So I'm just going to mount that ISO file now. Okay. The installation for Storefront is pretty simple. It relies on IIS, so it will install .NET, it will install the IIS role, and all the IIS role features it needs as part of the installation. So let's begin the setup now. So from the setup options, we'll choose Citrix Storefront. We'll accept the license terms, click Next. As you can see, the prereqs, it installs IIS, so I'm going to click Next on that. It will install IIS automatically. The version of Storefront we're using is 1912. Spec-wise for Storefront server, 4 vCPUs, 4 GB memory is typically what I tend to use for our Storefront servers. You can always scale out Storefront servers and add additional Storefront servers to the server group. A pair of Storefront servers should be sufficient with 4 vCPUs and 4 GB of memory for most deployments, unless you're going to a crazy solution where you've got like 5 to 10,000 users, 15,000 users, and the number of connections per second is a ridiculously high number. 2 Storefront servers within a server group with 4 vCPUs, 4 GB of memory should be sufficient for most deployments. So I'm going to click on Install on here. The installation will now start. What I will do is I will repeat the installation on the second Storefront server, so it will be exactly the same, and then once the installation has finished, I'll resume the video. So the installation of Storefront on both Storefront servers has now completed. The servers did reboot after the installation. So once the server's rebooted, I've just opened the Storefront console and here we are. So we'll set up first of all our configuration on our first Storefront server, SFO1, and then once we've done all our configuration, we'll then add SFO2 to the Storefront server group, and then we'll propagate the changes from SFO1 to SFO2. So SFO2 will then inherit the configuration from SFO1. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new deployment. We need to create a store and a base URL. Our base URL has to basically be the URL that the users will connect to. We'll have a SSL certificate that has that name as the common name. we'll typically then load balance that on the Netscaler, and there'll be a DNS record that has that name, which resolves it to the storefront load balancing VIP on the Netscaler. So I'm just going to enter our base URL here. So our base URL will be https:// and then we'll do storefront and then .carmo.com. Click next on that. What we'll next have to do is create a store, so we'll have to choose a store name. So once this is finished, we'll get to that stage. This takes a few minutes or so. Okay, there we go. So yeah, here we go. So yeah, I thought it wasn't going to give me the option there to create the store. So what we'll do is we'll click next on here, just on the getting started. Store name. This is the store that users will connect to with the receiver client, and also it will create a receiver for website as well. So we'll have store name and then web as well. So we're going to just create a store name called Carmo C4RM0. We'll set this receiver for website as the IS default, which means that users don't have to pen /citrix /carmo web onto the end of the URL. They can just type in the base URL and it will redirect to this default site in IS, which is handy. So I always tick that. We're not going to allow anonymous auth. We're going to set up specific authentication on the store, so we're not going to do anonymous auth. Under delivery controllers, we'll be adding in the previous video when we set up the site, we set up certificates on our delivery controllers and we load balanced our delivery controllers on the Netscaler, the XML service. So we'll be using that XML load balancing address for our storefront service to point to our delivery controller. So I'm going to add that now. So for the display name, we'll just call it Carmo XD site, and then it's going to be virtual apps and desktops. And then under add, our address is citrix xml vip.carmo.com. I'm just going to make sure that my storefront server's DNS is working and it can resolve that address to the Netscaler. I'm pretty certain it can, but best to be on the safe side. Citrix xml vip.carmo.com. Yeah, you can see it points to 192.168.3.138. If we have a look on our Netscaler and go to traffic management, load balancer, virtual servers, you can see there's our DDC XML virtual server VIP for our delivery controllers for the XML service. So on our storefront servers, as I say, we'll be using that address, Citrix XML vip.carmo.com. We'll be using HTTPS. We've got certificates on both of our delivery controllers that are part of that load balancing virtual server service group. So we can use SSL for the communication between storefront and our delivery controllers. So it will encrypt the XML traffic, which is what we want. Okay, so on here I'm just going to click on OK. I'll click on next. I'm not going to enable remote access yet. I'll enable remote access once this configuration is done. For authentication methods, again, I'll add pass-through from Netscaler after, once we start to add our Netscaler gateway appliance. Just for now, we're just going to use simple username and password. The XENAP services URL is used for PN agent. If you've got any legacy thin clients that have a really old version of the online plugin, you can use it to connect to the XENAP services URL, the old PN agent program neighborhood. So you can basically enable this if you've got those legacy clients. I haven't, so I won't be enabling it. I'm just going to click create on there. Let's just wait for that to finish. Okay, it's just going through the creation of the store. It'll take a few minutes or so just for this to finish. While that's going through, I'll just show you the configuration of my online CA. So I've got an enterprise CA on my domain controller, so I'm just going to basically show you what I've had to do to prepare the certificate template that we'll use to create the storefront certificate. So let's just go into here. So if we manage, this is my CA, it's a root CA, an enterprise CA. If we manage our certificate templates, what I did is I duplicated the inbuilt web server template and I just made a few changes to it. So under security, I've added the first storefront server and I've gave it the enroll and the read permissions, which allow that storefront server to enroll and use this certificate template to be able to get a certificate signed. One of the other things that I've did as well is under, where is it? Request handling cryptographic subject name. We're going to supply all the information in the request as part of the certificate request, the CSR. We have to specify different subject alternative names for all the storefront servers as well as discover receiver. If we use an email-based discovery. So we've got that set. I've also as well made the private key exportable. Let me just, where's that? I did see it. Request handling. Yeah, this option here, allow the private key to be exported under request handling. I've done that because I'll have to export the certificate and install basically on the second storefront server as well as the Netscaler. So I'll just quickly show you that, and then what I've did is I've then basically issued, I've come into here, click on new certificate template to issue, then I've chose that template and you can see it is it's issued there, web server template. So the installation is now finished, so the first storefront server is set up. What I'm going to do first of all, we'll do the certificate configuration first. So if I bring up the MMC console, and then if I do file, add, remove, snap in, certificates, add, computer account, next, local computer, and then under the personal store, if I do all tasks, request new certificate, using the Active Directory enrollment policy, I can connect to my enterprise CA. And that template that I've just showed you, the web server template, you can see here I can enroll for that certificate. So you can see here web server template. I'm going to click here to configure the settings. So under common name, our common name is storefront.carmo.com. So I'm going to add that. And then under DNS name, I'm going to add storefront.carmo.com again, and then I'm going to add both my storefront servers, so lon-ctx-sf01.carmo.com. I'm adding this as a subject alternative name, so basically you can connect to either of my storefront servers and you won't get a certificate error. It's pretty handy for testing. So lon-ctx-sf02. Okay, and then the last one we'll add is discover receiver.carmo.com. Okay, so that's that done. So discover receiver.carmo.com, both my storefront servers. Oh, actually I didn't put the FQDN on that one, so let me just redo that one. lon-ctx-sf02.carmo.com. We'll add on that. So we've got everything we need in there. So we'll click on apply. Under private key, under key options, we need to make sure the private key is exportable, which is what we set in the template. So everything looks good here. It's got everything we need. Storefront.carmo.com. It's got both storefront servers, and we've added Discover Receiver for the email-based discovery. So I'm going to click OK on that. Click on Enroll, and we now, if we go into certificates, we've got a new certificate for storefront.carmo.com. We have a private key that corresponds to this certificate, so everything is good. So what we need to do now is we need to go into IS bindings, and we need to bind this certificate. So if I go into sites, default website, IS bindings, we'll add HTTPS. There's no requirement to have a host header because we haven't got multiple sites. So we just choose storefront.carmo.com, click on view. The certificate's valid to the 17th of the 7th. Certificate's fully trusted. The chaining is correct. There's no issues there. Click on OK, click on OK, click on close, click on close, close all these windows out, and we've now successfully added the SSL certificate to our storefront server. So you can see here, storefront, if I refresh that, you can see those errors have now gone away. Storefront is now using HTTPS. What we need to do is we need to basically set up that certificate on our second storefront server as well. So I'm going to just export that certificate out, and then we'll copy it to our second storefront server. So I'm just going to bring that up now. Certificates personal, and then what we'll do is we'll do all tasks, export, next. Yes, we'll export the private key. We'll export it as PKCS12 PFX format. We'll give it a password. And then what we'll do is we'll save it on the desktop. We'll just call it storefront.carmo.com. We'll save it in PFX format. Click on next, click on finish, and then the export of the certificate was successful. So we now need to copy that to our second storefront server. So I'm just going to do that via UNC. So we'll do lon-ctx-sfo2, and then we'll stick on the router C. Okay, I think I left the firewall on. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, Windows firewall's on, so I'm just going to turn that on all the profiles. We'll turn it off. There we go. Try that again. There we go. That's worked now. So paste that into the router C. So if we now go on to our second storefront server, I'm going to get that certificate installed. So if we go to the router C, we should have the PFX file we exported. So I'm just going to double click that, set that to local machine, click on next, enter the import passwords. Don't want to include all extended property. Actually, we'll mark the private key as exportable as well. We'll click on next. We'll place the cert in the following store, in the personal store. Click on next, click on finish, and then that was done. So if we now go into IS Manager on here, if we go default website, IS bindings, again we'll add HTTPS. We'll choose our certificate, make sure it's fully trusted, which it is, it's valid, it's the correct certificate. We'll click OK, click on close, and then close out of that. So we've installed our SSL certificate now on both storefront servers. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish off a little bit of configuration on SFO1, and then we'll add SFO2 to our storefront server group. So I'm just going to show you basically some of the typical things that I change. So under Manage Authentication Methods, under username and password, what I tend to do is I tend to add the trusted domain here, because by default it will sign you on using any trusted domain with any type of trust, Active Directory trust. So what we want to do is we want to just set this to trusted domains only. I'll set this to carmo.com, click on OK. We've only got a single domain, so we'll set that as the default. We've got no need to have a domain drop down list. We'll click on OK and then click on OK again. So that's that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you some of the other options within Storefront that I typically set. Some of the most common settings. So if we click on Configure Store Settings, we've got the option here for Manage User Subscriptions. So what user subscriptions are is basically users can subscribe to applications, and when they go to a different device, those subscribed applications will follow them and will show under their favorites once they log into Storefront. They're replicated through a subscription database to all the Storefront servers within the Storefront server group. They're basically store specific. You can set it where the user subscriptions are replicated across stores, but that's out of scope really of this training. I can always do a blog and show you how to do that. A mandatory store is basically all applications will show, so when a user logs in, they don't have to go and find the application. It will automatically be listed under applications, and all their desktops will be listed under desktops. So yeah, it's personal preference really. It just depends if you want users to subscribe to apps, if you're using keywords, etc. In this example, I'm just going to leave it as a self-service store. Kerberos delegation. Previously, your Storefront servers had to be domain joined. Now you can actually have your Storefront servers on a work group, and you can delegate the authentication to the delivery controllers. Typically, previously, Storefront authentication service would authenticate the users. And as I say, the Storefront servers had to be domain joined, but you can now delegate that to the delivery controllers. So the Storefront authentication service won't authenticate users, it will delegate that to the delivery controllers. The delivery controllers will then communicate with Active Directory to authenticate your users. So that's pretty handy. Some of the advanced receiver for web settings, so I'm just going to show you them now. So if we edit our receiver for website and click on Manage, click on Configure. Featured app groups are really good. When you log into Storefront, you can basically use featured app groups. So when you're publishing applications, one of the properties of the published application are things like keywords and application categories. So I could create an application category, so I could have PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and as part of the published application I could put the application category as Office apps. So all of the applications would have that as their application category. When the users then log into Storefront, they would have this featured app group with this background here, and basically all of those applications that have got that specific Office apps app category would show in this featured app group. So it's pretty good feature. I use that quite a lot. Deploy Citrix Receiver Workspace app, so you can upload the receiver clients on your Storefront servers. I'll show you where that's located. So we go Program Files, Citrix, Receiver Storefront, Receiver Clients. You can download the Citrix Receiver clients and you can dump them into here, and then basically you can deploy the receiver clients from your Storefront servers rather than from citrix.com, which is pretty handy. So again, you see if I click browse, you can browse and choose the directory where those receiver clients are. You can also do a client upgrade where it does client detection, where it detects to see if the receiver's installed or not. I typically don't like that. It sometimes can get annoying for users. Typically you'll deploy Citrix Receiver through things like SCCM, or you'll configure it through group policy. All all your configuration settings will be set via the receiver ADMX files. So you don't really want users installing receiver. You want to define how receiver's installed and the configuration of it. So I typically use SCCM. I create a custom command line parameters and then push it out via SCCM, and then the configuration of receiver I do via the receiver ADMX file. So I typically, as I say, I don't normally allow users to download the receiver plugin, but again, personal preference. You can use the Html5 plugin if the users don't have the ability to install Citrix Receiver. They can use Html5 plugin, which is just basically via the web browser. You have to use a supported web browser like Chrome or Firefox, but the application or desktop will launch from within a tab within the HTML5 browser. So you do get some reduced functionality with the HTML5 plugin. So again, use it when needed. I'm just going to basically set this to install locally with no options for the users to download the plugin. Session settings. These are things like session timeouts. So when you're logged into Storefront, if there's no activity, how long it will actually leave you logged in for before signing you out. Sign in timeout is if you've just gone to the Storefront page and not entered any credentials. You've got the timeout settings there as well. Workspace Control allows you to roam sessions across different devices. So for example, if you've got App A on a laptop, and then you disconnect that session and then you move upstairs to a different room and you've got a different PC, it will allow you to reconnect to that existing session from the new device. So it's a pretty good option. Some advanced settings, client interface, things like auto launch desktop. If you've only got a single desktop published to you, it will automatically launch it when you log in, which is a bit annoying, I find, so I untick that. Desktop viewer is really handy. It gives you some additional functionality, so I leave that. Receiver workspace app configuration. It creates a CR file within your Storefront page, which allows you to download the CR file. Again, really should be doing all the configuration through group policy, so I don't typically enable that. Some advanced settings, you've got things like what do I normally set in here? Enable folder view is a pretty good option. So when you log into Storefront, you can have all your apps and desktops be displayed within folders, which is pretty good. Enable loopback communication. If you've got Storefront servers and you're load balancing them on the Netscaler and you're using SSL offload, so your backend Storefront services are HTTP, you have to set this to on using HTTP. So yeah, there's some typical options that are normally set. So I'm just going to come out of here now. What we're going to do now is we're going to basically add our Netscaler gateway. So I'm just going to go through this. So the display name will be remote.camo.com. My gateway URL is https:// and then it's remote.camo.com. We're going to be doing Authentication and Hdx Routing, so we'll click next on that. We're going to add the STAs, so I'm going to add both my STAs here. So it'll be https:// and then it'll be lon-ctx-ddc01.camo.com. These should match what you've set in the Netscaler. So let me just show you on the Netscaler. So if I go to Citrix Gateway Virtual Servers, there's my remote.camo.com Netscaler Gateway Virtual Server. If we come down and find our STAs, it's under Intranet Applications, and then one STA server here. You can see I've added it by HTTPS lon-ctx-ddc01, and then there's my STA ID. You'll notice I'm not using that Citrix XML VIP. you can't use a load balance address for the STAs. You can use it for the XML service, but for the STAs you can't. You have to point directly to the delivery controllers for the STAs. So that's why I've added it. Really I should have two there. I should have both, but just in this example I've just got the one. But in a production environment you would have both STAs there for both your delivery controllers. So yeah, so as I say, on Storefront we have to make sure this matches. So you can see there HTTPS lon-ctx DTC01, so that's okay. Session reliability, that will allow us to reconnect to disconnected sessions if the network drops. It will use, instead of 1494, it will use 2598, so you need to make sure that's open between your snip on your Netscalers and your VDAs. So we'll click next on that. Under Authentication Settings, we're just using domain. We're not using two-factor authentication at the moment, although I'll show you that later. So for the callback URL, callback's used for things like smart access and endpoint analysis results. I typically tend to set it because smart access is really good. You can control, you can set policies where you can filter on connections coming through the Netscaler gateway, certain session policies and certain gateway V servers. You can disable things like client drive redirection, printer redirection from connections through those Netscalers. So it's pretty handy. So I'm going to specify a callback URL. It's also required as well if you're using SAML authentication. So if you're using things like Okta with SAML authentication, a callback URL is required. So I'm just going to put my callback URL in here. Click on create, and then we'll click on finish, and then that's our Netscaler gateway added. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add and enable remote access on my store. So even though I've added the gateway, it isn't actually, remote access isn't enabled on my store. So I'm going to configure remote access. I'm going to enable it. I'm not using the VPN tunnel, the gateway as a VPN, full VPN. Or I'm not using clientless access, we're just using it for ICA proxy. So we'll just set this to no VPN tunnel. We'll add our gateway appliance, so default appliance remote.carmo.com. We'll click OK on that. What we need to do now is we need to change our authentication methods. We need to make sure pass through from Netscaler is ticked as an authentication method on our store. So you can see that's ticked, pass through from Citrix Gateway. We've got all our configure trusted domains, carmo.com, configure trusted domains, carmo.com. So that looks good. So I'm going to click OK on that. And now what I'll do, that's pretty much the configuration done. I'm just going to check the beacons. So our internal beacon will use the service URL, so it will use storefront.carmo.com. Our external beacon, it's going to use https remote.carmo.com and ping.citrix.com. Beacons are used if you're using the receiver client to connect to your Netscaler gateway URL or your storefront URL. Based off the beacon, it will decide if the connection's internal or external. And then what it will do is it will basically route you through either Storefront and send the connection directly to the VDAs, or it will send the connection through the Netscaler gateway, where it will proxy the connection to the VDAs through the Netscaler gateway. So that's what beacons are used for. They only really come into play if you're using the receiver client. If you're using receiver for web, beacons are not used. So that looks fine. I'm going to click OK on that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my second Storefront server to the server group. So I'm just going to log into my second Storefront server. And then I'm going to do join existing server group. So what I'm going to do on here, if we click on server group, I'm going to click on add server. And what it will do is it will give me an authorization code. So if I do join existing server group on my second server, if I type in the host name, so lon-ctx-sf01.carmo.com, and then the code is 8570, 8570 3245. Click on join, and what this will do now, this second storefront server will join my server group, and all the configuration that I've done on SFO1 will be propagated over to SFO2. So things like the authentication methods, the base URL, things like the Netscaler gateway appliance, all the configuration settings that I set on SFO1, they'll be propagated over to SFO2. So while that's going on, what I'm going to basically do is I'm just going to start the process to install and set up the Netscaler to load balance our storefront servers. So what we need to do is we need to basically come onto our storefront server and get that certificate. So I'm going to just get this storefront.carmo.com certificate. I'm just going to paste this locally on my machine. So we'll just put it under training, pictures. Yeah, we'll stick it in here, paste it in here. So we've got storefront.carmo.com. So if we now go onto our Netscaler, what we need to do under traffic management, SSL, and then under import pkcs12, we'll call it storefront.carmo.com. We'll choose the file, it's a local file, and then we'll choose our PFX. We'll choose the import password, AES256. We'll set up a PEM passphrase and click OK. So we've now successfully converted our PFX storefront certificate to a PEM format. We're now ready to install our certificate. So under traffic management SSL, if we come under certificates and then server certificates, if we click on install, we'll give it a cert key name. So it'll be storefront.carmo.com. The file name, we'll choose appliance, and then we'll browse to the second page. Right at the bottom we should have our PEM certificate that's been converted from the PFX. So we'll choose our PEM file, we'll click on OK. For the key file name, exactly the same, we'll choose the exact same file because the key is stored within the PEM file. We'll click on open, and then under password we'll enter the PEM passphrase, and then we'll click on install. And that's the storefront certificate now installed on our Netscaler. I'm just going to check the linkage just to make sure it's linked correctly to my root CA, which it is. So we'll click on OK. We're now ready to set up our load balancing entities. So we'll start with a service group. So we'll come into traffic management, load balancing, service groups. We'll click on add. We'll give it a name. So we'll call it CTX SF_SG for service group. The protocol will be SSL, and then we'll click on OK. We now need to bind our service group members to this service group, so we'll choose server based, click on add, we'll enter the server name, so lon-ctx-sf01. Because we've got DNS working on the Netscaler, we can do it by FQDN, so I'm going to enter the FQDN, so it will be .carmo.com. We'll then click on create. For the port, we'll be using SSL 443 because we're using end-to-end encryption. We'll then click on create. We'll do exactly the same to add the second storefront server, SFO2. So I'm going to paste that in, change that to 02, set that to domain name, set that to 02, and then click on create once we enter the FQDN. There we go, port number 443, again. We're using SSL, so we'll click on create, click on close, click on OK. So we've now created our service group. We've got our two service group members, which is our two storefront servers in our storefront server group, SFO1 and SFO2. They're both currently in the upstate, which is good. What I tend to do now is on the service group, this option here, insert client IP address. When your clients connect to your storefront servers, especially through a Netscaler, sometimes you want the client IP to be included in the header. So when you're troubleshooting and looking at the IIS logs, you can actually see the client's IP address rather than the SNP address of the Netscaler, etc. So this is a pretty handy option. I always tend to set this on my storefront servers. So you come under here, you choose insert client IP address, and the header that we need is x-forwarded4, like that, x-forwarded4. We'll click on OK, click on done, and that's all the service group configuration that we need to change. So the next stage is to create our load balancing virtual server. So I'm just going to give that a name. So we'll call that ctx-sf_vs for virtual server. The protocol is going to be SSL, and the IP address that we're going to use is 192.168.3.107. The port's going to be 443. We'll click on OK, and now we can bind our service group that we created in the previous step. So ctxff_sg. We'll click on select, click on bind, click on continue. We now need to bind our storefront cert, so I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to bind our storefront cert here, storefront.carmo.com, select, bind, continue. So that's basically it, that done. What we need to do now, Ssl Parameters, as it is best practice, you should always turn SSL v3 off on any SSL v servers, so I'm going to do that. Again, that should really be done under SSL Profiles, but we'll do that under SSL Parameters for now. We'll click on Done. We now need to set up the method and the persistence for this load balancing v server. So I'm going to add the method and the persistence. Least connection is the recommended for storefront rather than round robin, so we'll leave that on least connection. For persistence, we're going to set that to source IP, and we're going to match the timeout in storefront, which by default is 20 minutes. So this will use sticky sessions and persist us to one of the storefront servers for 20 minutes, which is what we want. So we'll click on OK, click on OK again, click on Done. So that's our load balancing v server done. We've got least connection as the method, source IP as the persistence, and we've bound our load balancing service group, which contains both our storefront servers. One of the last things we need to do is if we edit our storefront service group, and then if we click on monitors, you can see by default there's no dedicated storefront monitor, so we're actually going to create a dedicated storefront monitor. So if we call that ctx sf-mon, and then under type we'll choose storefront. We'll then go right up to the top, click select. Our store name is called Carmo C4RM0, and we want to make sure secure is ticked because we're using SSL services, storefront services, and we're doing end-to-end encryption. That's pretty much all the options that we need. So we'll click on create, we'll click on bind, click on done, and that's our storefront server group load balanced on the Netscaler successfully. What we now need to do, we'll save the configuration just to be on the safe side. We now need to create a DNS record that points to this VIP that we've just created for storefront. So we've got the VIP at 192.168.3.107. So I'm just going to log on to my domain controller, open up my DNS console. We'll expand our forward lookup zone, then carmo.com. In that zone, we're just going to create an A record. We'll call it storefront, and it'll be storefront.carmo.com. The address is going to be that VIP, so 192.168.3.107. We'll click on add host, we'll click on OK, click on done. So we should now see that A record, which is there. There you go, storefront.carmo.com resolves to 107, which is our load balancing VIP. So we can now test this. So if we go back to our domain controller, if we fire up Internet Explorer, I'm just going to type in, actually there's one last thing I like to do. So if we go back to our load balancing virtual server, I want to do a HTTP to HTTPS redirect on the V server. So we're going to click on more, and then we're going to redirect from port 80, and the HTTPS redirect URL will be https:// and then it's storefront.carmo.com. We'll click on continue,
and then click on done. So that's our HTTP to HTTPS redirect as well on our Storefront virtual server, which is best practice, and I like to do that. So if we now go back to our domain controller and try to connect to our Storefront URL, I'm just going to try connect on the HTTP URL, so storefront.carmo.com. If we press enter, what should happen is now that should be redirected to HTTPS, which it is, as you can see. So you can see we've been redirected to HTTPS because when we set up Storefront, we set Carmo store as the default in IIS, which means that the Carmo web site is the default IIS website, so it automatically appends Carmo web to the URL, which is good, which is what we want. There's no cert errors. You can see here we're using SSL. It's fully trusted from my root. There's no cert errors. If we do a properties of the page, you can see we're using TLS, so it is using encryption, which is what we want. So if we choose agree, we'll click on log on, and then we get to the username and password. So I'm just going to quickly log on to Storefront with my admin account. I've published a desktop, so I've created a machine catalog and a delivery group, published the desktop to the delivery group, so just so we can see. So I'm just going to log on now. Okay, so you can see here the logon was successful. Our application and desktop, the only desktop that we've got published, has been enumerated successfully. So Storefront's been able to communicate with that XML VIP that we've added to the Storefront store. It's communicated with the delivery controllers over the XML port. The delivery controllers have then communicated with SQL. And the list of apps and desktops that have been assigned have been enumerated back to Storefront, which is what we want. So everything looks like it's good. What I'm going to do in the next video is I'm going to show you the connection from the Netscaler. So there is a few little things that we have to do to finish off the configuration. I know we added the Netscaler as a gateway appliance, and I have got a gateway V server, but I haven't added any session policies and profiles yet. So you can see here's my Netscaler gateway V server. If we edit that, and then if we scroll all the way down here, you can see there's no session policies bound. So we need to basically create a new session policy and a profile, and under the web interface address we'll point to that new VIP that we've just created for our Storefront servers. So I'm just going to do that now, so we might as well get that done in this video, and then in the next video I can show you connecting through the gateway from my mobile phone. So if we go into Citrix Gateway, under policies and then session, what we'll do is we'll create a session policy first. I'm just going to call it receiver for web and then underscore policy. The expression that we're going to be using, so it'll be HTTP request and then the header, and then the header that we're after is the user-agent, and then we'll put contains, and then it's Citrix receiver, and then not. So this is basically the expression that we'll be going to use in HTTP request header user agent contains Citrix receiver not. So this is for our web browser, for receiver for web. If we were to create one for Citrix receiver, it wouldn't contain the .not on the end, but as we'll be just testing through a web browser, this is a receiver for web session policy. So we'll click on done, and then under profile I'm going to click on add, and I'm going to call this receiver for web, and then we'll call it profile. Under the client experience, there's a couple of settings under here that we need to choose. So clientless access, we'll set that to on. We'll set the Windows plugin, the plugin type to Windows and Mac OS. We'll override global single sign-on to web applications. That's all the settings that we need under client experience. Under security, we need to override and set the default authorization action to allow, and then the published applications, we'll be setting the ICA proxy to on, and then we'll be setting the web interface address So the web interface address is https:// you can put the FQDN here. I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to put the IP address. It's up to you really if you've got DNS. I've got DNS working, but it's sometimes better just to put the IP address here. So we'll point that our load balancing VIP for Storefront, and then it's /citrix, and then it's / and then it's Carmo web, like so. So you can see we've got our web interface address, points to our VIP on our Netscaler, our Storefront VIP, and then it's /citrix /Carmo web, and then the single sign-on domain will be Carmo, and then it'll be .com, and then we'll click on create, and then we'll associate this session policy with that new session profile that we've just created. We'll click on create. And now what we'll do is we'll go to our Citrix Gateway vServer, we'll edit that, and then under policies what we'll do is we'll click on the plus sign, we'll be adding a session policy, it'll be a request policy, we'll click on to select, and then we'll add our receiver for web policy that we've just added. So we'll click on that, click on bind, click on done, and that's all the Netscaler configuration that we've needed to do. So in the next video, what I'll do is I'll show you basically the connection from the outside on the internet. We'll go through a 3G, 4G mobile phone. We'll connect to our Netscaler gateway from the public internet, and we should be passed through to our Storefront server successfully. Okay, so I'll stop the video and then I'll resume once we're ready to do that. Okay, thanks, bye.
So this is the last video, the last section in this Storefront series. So what we're going to basically do here is I've connected my phone to my computer and I'm mirroring the screen from my phone. So what we're going to do is, as you can see, there's no Wi-Fi. I'm just purely using mobile data. So we're coming across the internet, we're going to hit our Netscaler gateway, we're going to authenticate our Netscaler gateway, and then if the configuration that we've done is correct, we should be passed through to our Storefront server and get our apps and desktops enumerated. So what I'm going to do is let's first of all, as you can see, my public IP address is 92.40.185.202. The ISP is Hutchinson 3G. My connection's a little bit slow. I live in a village and my signal out here is pretty crap. So if it's a bit slow, just bear with me. I'm just going to connect to HTTPS, and then we'll go to our Netscaler gateway URL, remote.carmo.com. Okay. So that's our gateway. Our gateway's loaded up. So I'm going to log in with the user ID test1 and enter the password. Don't worry, I will be changing the password once this video is finished. So we'll click on go on that. And now if everything that we've done so far has worked successfully, we should be passed through to our Storefront servers. And we should get our apps and desktops enumerated from the Carmo store. So let's just wait for this. Okay. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, the login has been successful. We didn't have to re-authenticate at Storefront, so the Netscaler has authenticated us using the LDAP authentication policy. It's then took those credentials and then passed those through to Storefront. And we didn't have to re-authenticate at Storefront. Storefront's then used the XML service, our XML VIP for our delivery controllers, to communicate with the delivery controllers. The delivery controllers has then got our group memberships from AD, and then it spoke to and communicated with the site database, and then it's looked at the apps and desktops that we've got assigned, and then it's passed those back through to Storefront and then passed back through the gateway. So everything appears to be working correctly. So what I'm going to do is I've got a published desktop here called 2016 desktop. I'm just going to open that just to make sure that that launches. Okay, I'm going to open that with the Workspace app on my phone. And there we go. That's our 2016 published desktop all launched through our gateway using the access layer that we've just built in this video series. So everything appears to be working correctly. Everything's good. I'm happy that everything's working how it should. Join me in the next video and we'll go through some Citrix policies. We'll look at some group policy settings, and then in the same video series we'll then look at the different hosting connections. So we'll set up Studio to connect to our vCenter. We'll connect it to our Hyper-V host using System Center Virtual Machine Manager. We'll also connect it to Azure as well, and we'll start to provision some machine catalogs and get some delivery groups created as well, get some apps and desktops published as well. So the next video series, I'll try to release that as soon as possible. Okay, cheers, thanks for watching, cheers, bye.